Hi there, my name's Adrian and welcome to Position 1 Power Equipment. Today we're going to look at this versatile piece of equipment, which is the P5200MT 5-in-1 Multi-tool. I've laid the entire box contents out on the table so you can see exactly what you get. So first of all, we've got the main head unit with the motor. A little bit of assembly to do on this. A two-piece handle, two black plastic parts of the handle which need assembling. The strimmer head, brush cutter strimmer head, a little bit of assembly on that, we shall go through that. The extension pole. The pole saw head, a little bit of assembly again, we shall go through that. And the hedge trimmer head. For the strimmer head we have the plastic guard, the strimming head itself, and the 3-tooth brush cutter. We have a comprehensive user manual. Now I do suggest you read this thoroughly. A pair of safety glasses, your harness, the chainsaw chain, saw bar and chain cover for the pole saw. We'll go through the assembly of that later. Your 2-stroke mixing bottle, we shall go through this as well. And your tool kit. Now inside the tool kit are all the nuts and bolts and screws that you're going to need to assemble the various parts and various tools. We shall go through that later. And that's the contents of your packaging. Let us start with fixing the handle assembly onto the head unit. Inside the toolkit you will find that there are 4 identical M5 bolts. These are the longer ones, you'll need those 4. And there are also 4 little M5 nuts, you're also going to need those. Also in the toolkit is this rubber sleeve with a groove on one end, and then the 2 parts of the plastic handle, and that's what we're going to need for this first stage. There will also be a 4mm Allen key for these 5mm bolts, and it's the longer, thinner one of the 2 Allen keys in the toolkit. So the first thing we need to do is to fit the nuts into the little hexagon holes in the bottom of the smaller plastic bracket, and you'll see there are 4 little hexagon holes. I'll give you a little close-up of this, and they just pop into the 4 holes so that they're ready to accept the bolts when you fit them. That's 3 and 4, and they just pop in quite simply. I'll give you a close-up of those fitted. So as you can see, there's the 4 nuts fitted into little hexagon recesses on the back of the first plastic piece. At the same time you will notice that there are 2 grooves on the one end of this. When you come to orientate the rubber bung, the inner groove sits in that position so that you get the bung in the right way round. So having inserted the 4 nuts, we can see that this handle goes on with the handle side to the left and away from the motor, and the bung goes in with the groove in the slot as I just showed. So we need to wrap the rubber sleeve around the column somewhere around here in the correct position. Then we can simply locate the under part of the handle up onto the rubber bung. I shall give you a close-up of this, and then the upper handle sits over the top. Simply holding it in one hand, you can fit the 4 screws right down through the 2 parts, just tightening them loosely for the time being. I'll come back and give you a close-up of this completely fitted. So I've assembled the handle with the 4 bolts the correct way up, so that when the push bar for the quick release is on the top, the handle's on the top. Now if you don't tighten these 4 bolts, it is possible to slide this up and down along the shaft to find the most comfortable position for yourself. And once you've found it, you can finally tighten the 4 bolts into position. A little bit of trial and error until you find what suits you for different sized people and what have you. So this can then be located and finally tightened down on the 4 bolts. And that's the handle fitted. The handle for the controls can also be moved up and down along the shaft. Once you've found the ideal position for yourself and what feels good in the hand, you can tighten this handle square in line with the motor by tightening this top screw here and this bottom screw here with the screwdriver provided, which will fasten the trigger mechanism handle securely to the shaft. So that's adjustment and positioning of the 2 handles. Again, the position at which the shoulder strap hangs in this location here, in exactly the same manner, using the Allen key, can be moved up and down along the shaft to the desired position for yourself. Okay, so that's fitting and adjustment of the positioning on the 3 handle locations. So having fitted the handles, let's talk about the fuel for your multi-tool. We do supply this bottle, which is the 2-stroke fuel mixing bottle. Now this is a 2-stroke engine, and it's absolutely imperative that you use a 2-stroke additive with the petrol that is used in the appliance. A semi-synthetic 2-stroke oil at a ratio of 40:1 is what's needed. This bottle is very useful. It has a level up here which says 576.92 millilitres, but if you fill this bottle with fresh unleaded petrol up to this line, it is actually written on the back exactly what to do, and then be quite accurate with this, get it on a nice level ground and what have you, and fill it with fresh unleaded petrol to that line, and then top it up with a semi-synthetic 2-stroke engine oil up to the 600 millilitre line, replace the cap, give it a good shake, and then that is the correct 40:1 mixture of 2-stroke oil to petrol for this machine. If it is ever run without 2-stroke oil in its petrol, it won't run for very long before the engine seizes, and then it's no good. So absolutely imperative that you always use the correct mixture of 2-stroke oil and fresh unleaded petrol. 40:1 semi-synthetic 2-stroke oil mixing bottle. Once you're mixed up and you're happy with it, you can then fill the fuel tank. The fuel tank cap has a cap on it which you unscrew anti-clockwise, and it has got a little retainer which you can pull out should you need to, and fill the tank to within about 25 millimeters or an inch from the top of the tank, so you don't overfill it. And obviously never fill it up when the engine is hot, always do it with a nice cold engine. So that's fueling your multi-tool. To start your multi-tool, there are 4 things you need to do. First of all, we need to prime the carburetor. I'll flick it over and give you a close-up of this, and the primer bulb is underneath between the fuel tank and the carb. And from an empty fuel tank, it will take 2 to 6 pushes. So that's the priming of the carburetor. Secondly, we will need to turn the choke on to the start position, which is in this case up away from the fuel tank with the lever on this side. I shall give you a close-up of that. Then we need to turn the kill switch on, which is back. Forward will stop the machine and back to start it. So having primed it, we have the choke on and it's switched on, we can then pull start the multi-tool in the usual way. Should it start or attempt to start, then switch off the choke after a few seconds. It should then idle nicely, and when you pull the throttle after a couple of minutes for it to warm up, it will then spin up and away to go. If it only attempted to start, again turn the choke off and pull start in the usual way, and then it will start. So if it starts or attempts to start, turn off the choke. If it's already started, then carry on. If it hasn't, then pull start with the choke turned off if it has previously attempted to start. So that's the starting procedure. Once you've finished with the machine, to stop it, let go of the throttle, let it run down to an idle, and then push the switch forward to stop. And I'll give you a close-up of the primer bulb, the choke, and the start-stop switch. So here is the primer bulb located underneath the carburettor, between the carburettor and the fuel tank. So 2 to 6 pushes. The choke lever is here. Up to start. Once started, or if it attempts to start, push it down into the run position. The start-stop switch is here on the hand control. Back to start and forward to stop. To connect any of the various appliances to your multi-tool, you'll see it has this quick release unit here, and all the connections are exactly the same for any one of the individual tools. On the end of the extension pole, it has exactly the same fitting again, so that various tools can be also fitted on the end of the extension pole. So to fit any of the appliances, remove the protective cover. I'd probably suggest that you keep these on the end of various appliances to stop dirt getting into the drive mechanism. Push down on the trigger and fit it until you hear a click. Now you will see that there is a rectangular hole in the top of the shaft, and the little pin on the top of the quick release will drop into that hole. So there we are. Sometimes a little bit of a turn is necessary to align the two drive shafts. So you may have to wriggle it around, turn it, it'll go in, and then rotate it back until you hear the locking click. Once it's locked in position, tighten up on the hand wheel, and that's it fitted. And it's exactly the same procedure for all of the other adapters or tools that go onto the multi-tool. I'll just remove that, loosen the hand wheel, push the lever and withdraw the tool. To refit, fit the tool, rotate until you hear the click, and tighten the hand wheel. Simple as that. And that's the headstock complete. Let's move on to the assembly of the trimmer and brush cutter assembly. For this, again in the toolkit, you will find a double-ended box spanner. You'll need the 2 Allen keys this time, and the 2 remaining bolts from the toolkit. You'll need the trimming head itself, the guard, the trimming head if that's the one you want to fit. I shall show you both, and the brush cutting head. So I'll show you fitting the trimming head and the brush cutting head. So those are the components of the brush cutting and trimming head. Let's start by fitting the guard. So if we take the trimmer head itself, you'll see that it has a bracket on the back with 2 holes. The guard locates in a little nest here above the 2 holes, and by using the 2 final bolts from your toolkit, simply screw the 2 bolts into the 2 holes by hand, getting them started, and then using the larger, thicker of the 2 Allen keys, you can tighten down the 2 bolts. Let's just make sure these are secure. Okay, and that's how to fit the guard. So here we are, that's the guard fitted to the trimming head with the 2 bolts in position. Let's start by showing you how to fit the trimming head. You will notice on the bottom that you have a nut, a chrome dome. So I'll remove the nut. Now this is a left-hand thread, so clockwise to undo it. So remove the nut, the dome, and you'll see that there is a domed washer. So we'll remove the washer. The next part on here is the actual drive flange, and you'll see that it has a hole in its perimeter on one side. Equally to this, in the side of the unit, you'll see that there is a hole and a groove in the main body, which you can fit the smaller of the two Allen keys through. So I'll put the drive flange back on and rotate it into a position where I can lock it solid. Where are you? Here we go. And fit the Allen key through to hold the drive shaft while I fit the bump head. Again, left hand thread, so I need to turn it anti-clockwise to fit the bump head. Again, holding the drive shaft with the Allen key, rotating anti-clockwise until it's tight, remove the Allen key, and that's the bump head fitted, ready for use. To remove the bump head, in exact the reverse order of the way you fitted it, line up the holes, put the Allen key in through the holes to lock the head, and then this time turning clockwise, because of the left hand thread, you can remove the bump head. Let's move on to fitting the brush cutting head. So having removed the bump head, to fit the brush cutting head, again, the Allen key through the holes to lock everything in position. The first thing you will notice is there is a register on the inside of the drive flange. The writing on the brush cutting head points up towards the operator and sits neatly over that flange. So making sure that it stays located, then fit the gold coloured washer with the dome facing away from the blade, or in this direction, then the chrome bumper, and then again anti-clockwise with the nut, screw the nut on till you meet resistance, then using the spark plug spanner, again anti-clockwise, and holding the shaft with the Allen key, check its rotation, just making sure it's tight, and at this stage you can remove the protective cover from around the outside, which is there to protect the blade when it's not being used. And I recommend when you finish using it, put this back on. It'll prevent damage of the blade when it's bumping around in your van or in your garden or shed or what have you. So yeah, that's the fitting of the brush cutting blade. And again, to remove it, exactly the same, clockwise on the nut, remove it all off for replacement bump head or trimming head and what have you. So that is the brush cutting and trimming head assembly done. So let's move on to the assembly of the pole saw head. You will need the pole saw head itself, the chain bar, the chain cover, and from the toolkit you'll need a 10mm spanner and the straight screwdriver from the toolkit. And that's everything you're going to need. Now, the chain is very sharp, especially a brand new chain is very sharp, so I do recommend that you use suitable gloves while going through this procedure. So the first thing we need to do, using the 10mm end of the spanner, is loosen off the nut, remove the nut and the outer cover. And that reveals the mechanism. This is the pulley that drives the chain, and the bar sits, you'll notice that there is a thread in the middle which goes in the slot, and a pin here which sits in the hole in the bar. So it will sit like that. When this screw here is tightened clockwise, it pulls this pin in this direction. Anti-clockwise sends it back this way. So the chain tensioning is actually done by tightening that screw underneath, which then pulls the bar out this way and tensions the chain against the pulley. Just so you have a little understanding of how this works. So clockwise will bring the bar this way, anti-clockwise back in, for adjusting the tension of the chain. On the same note, you'll notice that there is an arrow and a picture showing a picture of one of the teeth on the chain on the top of the bar here, indicating that the chain travels in this direction around and back around the bottom. Equally on the chain, on the silver links, is an arrow pointing in the same direction, If you have the chain on back to front, obviously the arrow will be facing the wrong way. So I'll give you a close-up of the chain in its correct orientation on the bar. So as you can see, the arrow on the bar is here pointing in this direction, and on the link of the chain there is a little arrow between the two rivets pointing in the same direction, and that tells me that I've got the chain on the bar the correct way round. Now to fit the bar onto the pole saw. So having established the correct orientation of the chain and the bar, the next thing to do is to loop the chain. I've removed it from the bar, loop the chain into the grooves in the drive pulley. It is a little bit awkward because I'm wearing gloves to do this, but it's actually doesn't take a great deal of doing. Having done that, we'll just loop the bar into the slots, place it roughly in position, get the chain sitting in the slots in the bar. Here we are. And place the bar down so that it locates over the drive pin or the tensioning pin here. So the next step, having done that, is to replace the outer cover and put the nut back in position just finger tight to locate it. Now as you can see, the chain here is very loose indeed. So we need to turn the adjustment screw on the back, this screw here, clockwise until we achieve the correct tension, and I'll talk you through that. So I've just placed it on top of its cover here so I don't damage the chain on the bench. So I've tightened up the screw here clockwise 3 or 4 turns until I've got to a position where the chain, I'm still wearing gloves you'll note, runs freely, and you may need to run this just back and forth a couple of times, wearing gloves as I say, and as you can see it's now become looser as it's bedded into all its grooves. So I need to tension more because the chain is actually coming out of the groove completely at some points. So another quarter turn, that feels better. It still runs freely, as you can see, and the chain doesn't quite come out of the groove. Now when you're using the chain, it's always going to push in this upward direction, so I'll just lift the bar up to that position, to its top position, and I'll tighten the cover on the screw. Okay, so having done that, I'll now check the chain again. It still rotates freely and it still has movement. Now when you first start using the pole saw, the chain will initially stretch, so you need to keep an eye on the tension of that chain during its first couple of uses, because you don't want the chain becoming too loose, and it will stretch initially and then it will stop stretching. So keep an eye on the tension, and should it become loose, just loosen off the nut on the back and maybe a 1/4 of a turn on that screw just to bring up the tension. And as you can see, it comes out of the groove, not completely, it still runs freely, and that's the chain set and locked. I'll just put the cover on it for safekeeping, and we'll talk about the chain lubricating oil. When you start using your pole saw, if you notice that there is excessive oil on the blade, this screw here meters the amount of oil fed to the chain. So clockwise reduces the amount of oil, anti-clockwise increases it. It should be moist with oil. If you give it a few revs, it should spatter off a couple of drops of oil onto the floor. So if you're not seeing any oil at all, unscrew it anti-clockwise. If you're having excessive oil and it's soaking wet, so to speak, clockwise to reduce the oil flow. So that's adjustment of the oil flow for the chain loop. So the last part is the hedge trimmer attachment. Now this has 2 prongs here, which enables you to bend it in several directions for the ideal angle of where you're working. You just squeeze the 2 handles and move, and it can go anywhere from 90 degrees that way, 180, and right round to its storage position there. On another note, you'll notice that on all of the appliances there are grease nipples. On this particular one it has 2. It is important that from time to time that you do give the grease nipples or lubricate them with a couple of shots of grease from time to time in accordance with the instructions in the manual. But just pointing out, grease nipples, there are 2 on this one. I believe there's 1 on the chainsaw head and 1 on the strimmer head as well. So on occasion, in accordance with the instructions in the instruction manual, hence why it's so important to read it, is what type of grease and how often it should be lubricated. It also comes with 2 plastic covers. I recommend you keep these on because again the hedge trimmer is a sharp tool. Okay, so one final thing to show you is the operation of the shoulder strap. You'll notice that there is a loop here which can be adjusted up and down to suit your favourite position, and a spring hook on the strap which fits into it to pick it up nicely. There is also a quick release mechanism here so that you can pull on this red tag and it releases. To reattach, simply feed the bottom part through, the bar back through the slot, and you're back connected again. So that's the operation and use of the quick release shoulder strap. Well, I do hope you found this demonstration useful. For more information on this or any of our other products, visit www.p1pe.co.uk. I've been Adrian and happy gardening.